So this lecture is going to discuss the values of rangelands, and more specifically the different commodities, the different ecosystem services that rangelands produce and house. So today our major goals are for this lecture to define the term multiple use and then look at the benefits and uses of rangeland. So multiple use is a term that is one of those buzzwords in rangeland, and rangelands are going to have many, many, many different uses. So it's important to manage for each one of those uses, not just one in particular. So this term multiple use is written into lots of different grazing contracts, lots of different mission statements of federal and state and private agencies that are going to be maintaining or managing rangeland. Rangelands are important for a lot of different reasons, and each one of these different services we're actually going to go through and look more in depthly at. But this just gives you a really nice overview of the many things that rangelands actually produce or provide to society. So livestock production is one of the ones that we're going to touch most on in this class, because this is a grazing and rangelands class. And so livestock production is important, especially in the West, because of the extensive amount of rangeland that we have. So in the 19 western states, those are actually home to over half of the beef cattle in the U.S. And those rangelands also are going to harbor 79% of the sheep that's produced in the U.S., 88% of the goats, and then to a lesser extent cattle as well, because a lot of cattle production also tends to be in the East and in the Midwest. So livestock production is important because a byproduct of rangelands are going to be in the form of meat, leather, wool, mohair, and a variety of other products. Looking at California more specifically, approximately 19% of California's total land mass, or 100 million acres, is actually grazed by rangeland, or grazed by domestic and wild animals. So that's a fairly large percentage compared to the total land mass. In addition, so California's range production in California is also one of is a fairly large component of land use, as well as cash receipts, both at the private, the state, and the federal level. Wildlife habitat, we already discussed in the previous lecture a little bit about the different percentages of wildlife that occur on rangeland. So no need to really go over those numbers again, but just realize that rangelands provide habitat for a lot of the mammals, birds, amphibians, fishes, and insects that we have here in the U.S. So some of the wildlife that you may encounter and that we're going to talk about throughout the semester are ruminants. These are going to be like our deer, elk, and moose, and they have a specialized digestive system like our domestic cattle and sheep, in the fact that they have a rumen. So their digestive system has the ability to handle a large amount of cellulose. You'll also see lots of rodents and rabbits. They can also handle large amounts of cellulose. They have a different digestive system, but it has evolved over time to handle that cellulose load. And then we have concentrate selectors, and these are going to be in animals that have a different type of digestive system and actually have to choose a higher quality feed source to survive. Water is always a very large topic in rangeland, so realize that that most of the water that actually falls in the form of precipitation, whether that's snow, fog, rain, is actually falling on rangeland and then running to tributaries that run to store either straight out to the ocean or to storage facilities such as Shasta Lake, Lake Oroville, Folsom, any of those. So in the West, water is very, very important because 30% of the U.S. population lives in the 19 western states. So most of the water in the streams that are in Northern California actually fell initially on rangeland or forested area and then flowed to a tributary of some sort. Recreation is also a big use of rangeland. Here in California, we put a lot of emphasis on recreation because we have a large urban population that likes to get out and go hiking and camping and use the great outdoors. So recreation comes in many forms, as you can see listed in the slide here. So there so we do manage for recreation a lot in California, as well as the other western states. Renewable energy is also a big use of rangelands, so especially throughout areas that are not necessarily lower in elevation, but have minimal topography. So I don't know if you guys have ever been on I-10 headed from LA to Arizona, but you can see lots and lots of wind farms. And the reason that those wind farms are there is because we get really interesting Santa Ana winds through the winter as well as through the summer. So to create lots of energy for Southern California. So energy development can be in the form of wind turbines, solar, geothermal. Actually, 12 of the western states actually have geothermal development, and then also biomass and bioenergy. So one of the things that we may talk about a little bit in class is the biomass form of renewable energy, because that affects a lot of the north states. So realize that in forested areas they can go in and log part of it, but some of those trees aren't high enough quality to actually go to a lumber mill and be broken down into 2x4s or actually grade 1 lumber. So a lot of that ends up being chipped, especially if the trees are small or it's after a fire, and those chips are then burned in biomass facilities to produce energy. And there was a really big initiative last August because all of those biomass facilities in the Northern California were up for a renewal contract, and there was word that Governor Brown wasn't going to renew those contracts, and so that would put a lot of businesses out of business and really be detrimental to the rural populations. Another byproduct of rangelands is minerals and mining. So there's lots of minerals associated with rangeland, especially in the 19 western states. And these are going to be some of the most basic natural resources. So sand, gravel, dirt, rock for construction. Those are going to be products of rangeland. And then also some of the other traditional minerals that we think of, such as coal, shale, mining, etc. So in California, gold was really important to the development of California and the discovery and the population moving from the east. So in addition to gold, we also have mined silver, lead, and zinc. They mine a lot of silver in Nevada, and they're starting to find new silver deposits in Nevada. So the mining industry in central Nevada is actually picking back up again. And those rural communities like Austin, Eureka area of Nevada is really starting to boom again as well. Native plants are also produced on rangeland, so these can be in the form of natural medicine such as echinacea or St. John's wort. Echinacea is always important for immune function. It's one of the things that you can take as a supplement if you're getting sick or think you're getting sick. And then St. John's wort is a natural antidepressant. And then there's also going to be wild foods that are produced from native plant products such as camas, and then huckleberries and pine nuts. And one of the big benefits of open space, or one of the big benefits of rangeland, is open space. So people um, in the West really value open space. So they are working with livestock producers on the private side to maintain biodiversity and habitat quality by just having them not build or sell out to developers, so that that land stays contiguous, and we have big plots of open space for wildlife and for scenic beauty as well. And then rangelands are really associated with Western heritage, and they're a good way to preserve that heritage as well. So Western heritage comes in a couple of different forms. Could be in the form of ranching, so that Western image of a cowboy riding through a piece of rangeland and not coming upon any fences. That's also important to our culture as well, just like any other culture, you know, preserves their heritage. So Western heritage is also going to be one of those things that is preserved by preserving and managing for open space and on rangelands. So rangelands are owned primarily in the western U.S. At the federal level in greater percentages compared to the Midwest and the East Coast. And you can see that in that figure here. So almost half of California is actually owned at the federal level. Almost 85% of Nevada is actually federal land. So you can see here that we have large amounts of federal and government land in the West and very minimal in the East, through the Midwest. So public lands versus private lands, you're gonna hear me use those terms a lot. So public land is going to be owned by the government, both at the county, state, and federal levels. And then the two most significant land managers in the U.S. at the federal level are the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. They manage the most amount of acres that have to do with rangeland. Other agencies include the National Park Service and the Department of Defense. So grazing on private lands also happens, and that's really important for California. We have a lot of large ranches here in California that's privately owned. So, and because of our Mediterranean climate, a lot of our grazing will actually occur on federal lands during the summer in the high country, such as forested land and BLM land, and then on private land in the winter and the spring. So to end and to summarize, rangelands are really important for a variety of different reasons, and we're going to be talking about these different values and these different ecosystem services that rangelands support throughout the semester. So make sure you have a really good idea of what each one of these are.